Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics who write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs, and currently I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is Ryan Fredericks, author of the book Sell Naked and Other Advice for Growing and Managing Your Service Firms. Ryan, welcome.
Mark, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. So let's start off with you telling us about your professional background, how you got to where you're at right now.
It's a long and winding road, as it is for many people. I got very fortunate early in my career and joined what at the time would have been considered a small business, and now we would call it a startup. And that I was there for 7 years. That company ended up selling. I didn't have any equity, but I got to know the investors and I got to know people in and around the business. And then I identified another problem while I was at that company that I said, "Hey, I think we can go after this and build another business around this." And the investors agreed, and so we started a company to go after a tangential problem. And then we sold that, and then it got to the point where the lead investor in particular, he and I developed a good relationship, so we ended up starting a couple of more companies together. And then 17 years ago, I sold a company, took a year off, wasn't sure what I wanted to do. That actually was the worst year of my life because I realized that I was trying to turn hobbies into full-time sort of focus and work, and that's never good. And so then I joined AWH, which is now Transform Labs. We rebranded a bit ago, and I've been there now for the last 15 years, helping to lead that organization. The organization has been around for 31 now in May, and I've been there for 15 of those years. So sort of like you, serial founder, started several companies, and then found my way into helping to run a professional services firm. And that's part of the reason I wrote the book, is because I had always started and operated product companies. And so when I joined AWH, that was and now Transform Labs, that was my first opportunity to lead a professional services firm.
Fantastic. Well, I really enjoyed your book. So let's start off with the importance of marketing on chapter part one. You argued that many service firms fail because great craftspeople are not automatically great business people. What mindset shift has to happen for founders to truly grow a firm?
Yeah, especially with services firms, people who are great at a craft that they can start a services firm around. It might be design, it might be accounting, it might be legal, it might be branding, etc. Ultimately, being good at a craft, it doesn't make you a good marketer and it doesn't make you a good business person. And in some regards, being really good at a specific domain and craft actually hinders your ability to then be a good marketer and be a good business person, because you're very steeped in the craft and the mechanisms of the craft. And it's hard to then separate the fact that doing the craft well is very different than operating a business well, and then certainly can be very different than marketing a craft and a services firm. So that evolution is just difficult for a lot of people that I've seen over the years. And it's easy to start a services firm because you are good in your craft. It's then really hard to grow a services firm if you can't figure out how to be a good operator and then ultimately be a good marketer.
Yeah, I often find that people start service firms. So if they get one client and it's a good client, they stop looking for clients when they have to take on more clients than they can handle because things are always changing.
Yeah, it's always a balance, especially early on with a services firm, or you have to be a seller doer. And when you're doing more doing, you're not doing enough selling to actually grow the business and then reinforce, the fact that you're going to have a backlog when you're done serving the clients that you're serving now, or when you try to spin all the plates and serve multiple clients at the same time. That's just a really challenging existence for most new service firm owners, is how do you balance selling and doing and getting that so that it's an appropriate balance so you're not leaning too heavily one way or the other.
In the book, you describe marketing as a discipline rather than a side activity. Why do so many service firms underestimate marketing?
I think because many people who start services firms are craftspeople in a particular discipline. And I think they turn their nose up at marketing because they're a great architect and they're steeped in their architectural knowledge and certifications and capabilities. And so they then turn their nose up at marketing because marketing is for the people that aren't steeped in their craft and aren't that knowledgeable and aren't sort of an expert. The challenge with that thinking is if you are indeed an expert in your domain, if nobody knows about it, the relevance of your expertise then goes wanting because there is no distribution for your expertise. And so it has to become the balance of valuing marketing, valuing business development. Otherwise, your expertise is going to be limited in its exposure, impact, and value. And I just see it sort of time and again where people start a services firm or they're in it, and I talk to them and they're like, we've been around for 20 years. We've had trouble growing. We're really not that much bigger than we were 20 years ago. And it's almost always because they've let the specter of marketing stand in the way of them needing a good and a bigger bullhorn, right, to support their expertise.
You talk about creating a marketing firm inside the firm. What does that look like in practice for a smaller company with limited resources? And I imagine AI has created great value since you even wrote this book.
Absolutely. Yeah, things would be very different now with AI than when I wrote Sell Naked. When I wrote Sell Naked, the whole idea was I saw too many services firms that because of this idea of marketing what was foreign to them or beneath them, lots of leaders of services firms would then outsource marketing. They would bring in some sort of a branding firm, they'd bring in some sort of a digital marketing firm, they'd bring in some sort of a PR firm, and they would outsource a lot of their marketing activities, thought leadership, content, etc. And I almost never saw that work in a way that was commensurate with the expense and the energy of all of that outsourcing. So one of the things that I did at AWH at the time was to say, if we can't have marketing be a core capability of the firm, we're not going to get where we want to go. And so I made sure that we were intentional about becoming good content marketers and producing quite a bit of our own content, and that we were good at executing and running campaigns and understanding what worked and what didn't work, and making sure that we were visible experts and thought leaders. And so, but I didn't see a lot of services firms doing that, especially the ones that were struggling to grow and scale. They tried to outsource it, and I saw that rarely work. And so insourcing was what worked for us. And for the other firms that I saw being successful, insourcing marketing was a key to that success.
You introduced the idea of visibility value. How can firms measure whether visibility is actually translating into trust and future business opportunities?
Yeah, thought leadership and branding and content and all of these marketing activities have always been a little bit soft and squishy. And so, but I always had a sense of if we were doing the right things and if we were generating some level of visibility, there had to be some value to that. And so when I would go speak at conferences or events, and even now doing that as part of our work at Transform Labs, I always thought there had to be a way to then look at it and make it a little bit formulaic around if we got exposure to X number of people, even if that didn't correlate into a short-term sales opportunity, there was still value in that visibility. And so then I coined this term visibility value because I think that you have to continue to do those things, even if there isn't a direct line of sight to, oh, we got a lead out of this, we got a new opportunity, we got a new client. And it begins to make something a little bit more quantifiable that historically for many services firms remains unquantifiable because they just run around doing a bunch of things that they think are driving visibility, but when they sit down and actually try to quantify it, it's really not driving that much visibility and picking the right things to do. I would see so many leaders of services firms showing up to conferences and events and other activities, and I would say to them, how long have you been participating? And they would say something like 3 or 4 years, and I would say, have you ever gotten anything out of it? And they would say no, and I'm like, why are you still here? Like, why are you still coming? And so being really honest with ourselves too as leaders of services firms of what is activity for the sake of activity that's keeping us busy and what's activity that actually drives value for the firm.
Yeah, how many business development people just think having meeting after meeting is actually doing something when no deals are getting closed, right?
Right. It's like, oh, I'm gonna go have another coffee with this person, and it's like, okay, you've met for coffee, 8 times over the last 6 months. Is
Yeah,
this progressing towards something, or is this a way to just check a box on a report that, yeah, you had one more coffee with one more contact?
yeah, and often they're afraid to get take no when most salespeople know, right? A no is as good as a yes, so you don't waste your time.
100%, right? I would rather get to the fact that there isn't an opportunity for us to do business together faster rather than later. I don't need I don't need more friends that are wearing the costume of potentially being a client.
I tell my students for when we're doing startups, I tell them you've got to ask people that you're who are in your target market, would they consider being a beta tester with the idea of buying, and that if they really don't want this product, then just tell you straight up that you don't want to build something or give them something they don't want, because oftentimes people are afraid to ask that hard question, right? And so they go and build something and then they go back to a person, yeah, that's not really for me. I think it's a great idea, but it's not for us. And then you've just wasted months, which you can never get back, and a lot of money building something. I experienced it myself, building something that was solving a problem, but nobody cared to solve it.
Yeah, this is actually a point in a chapter in the other book that I've written, the Founder's Manual. But I
Yeah.
think most product validation happens improperly. Most product validation happens, or even service validation happens through the lens of tell me why you would use this, tell me why you would value it, tell me why you would like it, etc. Most product validation needs to be counterintuitive, and you need to give the person permission to say no. And so the proper way to do product validation is to say, tell me what you don't like about it, tell me why you wouldn't use it, tell me why this would provide no value to you.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. Question from the audience. Many service firms say they are trusted advisors in quotes, but they still optimize around utilization and revenue growth. What behaviors reveal that a service firm is really focused on the client winning rather than serving their own KPIs?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because there's a balance to strike there because I've also seen services firms that tend to go to swing the pendulum too far one way or the other. And sometimes it can even be situationally where they're bending over, backwards multiple times for a client. And the client is now taking advantage of the situation and their goodwill and their desire to be a good partner and to provide good service. And so there is a balance between you've got to operate, you fundamentally have to operate a good, profitable business with providing exceptional value and service to clients. And I think in most cases, if you step back and say, is this a positively reciprocal relationship with a client? Then you can make decisions for that client and your engagement with that client that maybe aren't in your financial best interest in the short term, but in the long term, you know that you have a client that you have a positive, constructive partnership with that it's worth investing in. But there are other clients, frankly, that aren't worth investing that kind of time, energy, and money into because they look at you as a vendor. So if a client is looking at you as a vendor, I think you have a transactional relationship with that client, and I don't think in that case that it's necessarily harmful for you to then look at it through the lens of pure business versus this lens of exceptional service. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. Um, in part two, sales is different in service firms. The phrase sell naked is memorable and bold. What does it really mean, and why is transparency so critical in selling services?
Yeah, one of the things that I learned once I got into the services business is that selling a service versus selling a product is a very different animal. When you're selling a product, you can do demos. The prospective customers can touch it, they can feel it. There's a tangibility to the product, even if the product is digital in nature, like software. Selling services is much more abstract. And so it takes more dexterity and it takes a balance between this intangibility and then trying to bring a little bit of concreteness and a little bit of tangibility to it. But that typically means going in and being sort of an open book and being open-minded and not going in with a particular pitch deck or proposal or brochureware, etc., that sometimes can work and is okay on the product side. But in selling services, going into a prospective client and saying, well, we do X, Y, and Z. Now you're forcing the client to make a choice. Well, do I want X, Y, or Z? And maybe what they really want is C, D, E, or F. And so you've got to go in less prescriptive about what you're going to sell them and what they want because you don't know how you're going to balance what your capabilities are with what their needs are.
You explain that people buy what they want, not necessarily what firms want to sell. How can service providers better identify what clients truly value?
Yeah, it starts with this idea of going in and being an open book and selling naked, as it were, without a lot of props and without a lot of propaganda. And then it really is listening and getting to and if you have a deep enough, extended enough conversation with the prospective client, they eventually will shine a light on what they're looking to buy, how they're looking to buy it, and what you need to frame and shape of your capabilities to align with those things. And so it's really about that discovery and turning it into a conversation. I think it's also very appropriate to challenge a prospective client on the way that they see their business, the way they see their market, their world, and their needs and their problems. Because sometimes you get it, and we all do this inside of our businesses. We get very myopic, and we think that we've got the right perspective and we've got the right view of it until somebody challenges us and says, "Hey, maybe think about it this way," and then that might even change what they see as their need and how that aligns with what you can do and what your capabilities are to help them solve a problem that may ultimately pivot from what they think their problem is when you first started talking to them.
Partnerships and word of mouth play a major role in growth. What separates strategic partnerships that work from those that fail?
I'm a big believer in if a partnership is going to work, because most partnerships don't work. Most partnerships are a lot of hyperbole, a lot of good intention, a lot of good conversation and you think, oh, there's something to really be done here and we're going to help each other and this is going to be great. And most of them don't go anywhere and most are a waste of time. The way that I now look at them is I want to, as quickly as possible, actually do some business with a partner, whether it's me and us and my firm engaging them in some way, or it's them engaging, us in some way because you've got to take it out of the idea of hope and potential, and you've got to bring it into the realm of can we practically actually partner in some way? And then while we're partnering on some sort of thing, do we collaborate well? Do we coordinate well? Do we align well? Do we see this the same way, etc.? So I think that you've got to, as quickly as possible, say, we're going to take this partnership potential out of the realm of potential into reality, and then we're going to see how it goes.
Um, Many firms struggle with branding because they think results alone should speak for themselves. Why does design, positioning, and perception matter so much in professional services?
Yeah, I see a lot of professional services firms that have fancy offices and they have a great logo and by all accounts their branding is pretty good and most would look at it and say, yeah, they've got a good brand. Brand ultimately comes down to the micro behaviors and actions and decisions that a company makes. And so if the window dressing doesn't match how a firm actually conducts business and operates, clients will see that, the market will see that pretty clearly and pretty quickly. And so you've got to think about and you've got to have all the elements of good branding. That's becoming less important in the era of AI as well. AI is, making things that, we thought there was power in brand. AI is probably taking a little bit of it is putting that in the crosshairs. Um, and so you've got to think about brand, but then you've got to back it up with how you actually operate, because that's actually really the definition of your brand, especially for a services firm.
You write openly about the dangers of poor cash flow management in service firms. Why do so many profitable firms still run into financial trouble? And there's been major accounting firms that have gone under because of that.
Absolutely. What most people don't realize when they start a services firm is they're actually now a bank and they're a financing company, because you're going to incur the cost of providing the service before you invoice a client for it and before you collect on that invoice. And sometimes that's due upon receipt, and that's you collect the money in short order. Sometimes it's net 10 days, sometimes it's 30, etc. Irrespective, there you are floating cash to your clients, and you've got to then manage that cash flow against your profitability. There have been so many services firms, as you mentioned, that on paper they looked highly profitable, yet they couldn't pay the rent or they couldn't pay their team because on paper they were profitable, but their AR had $5 million of uncollected AR in it, and eventually you're going to not be able to cover that just because you were profitable. So there's a huge difference in a services firm, every company, but certainly in a services firm between being profitable and being cash flow positive. And a lot of people running services firms don't understand the cash flow piece of it, irrespective of how profitable you might look on paper.
Billing and pricing are constant challenges in service businesses. What are the biggest pricing mistakes founders make?
They underprice
Yeah,
because
I think we all do.
yeah, they think that they need to come out of the gate um, to be competitive. They need to have a lower price. The lower price strategy, unless you're a commodity, the lowest price is probably not going to be something that you want to do or is going to work. because especially for services firms, because if someone's hiring a services firm, they're probably looking for an external expertise that they don't have inside of the company. Well, if they're looking for a level of expertise, right, they're probably not just shopping on price, and they're probably not going to go with the lowest price if indeed they're really backing up the fact that they're looking for some external expertise from a services firm. If you're in a product business, right, it can be a different story because you might want to go grab market share, et cetera. But in a services firm, you're not going to just price a service at a certain level to go try to capture market share. It just doesn't work the same way that it does in product companies. And I would argue, and I actually encourage whenever I talk to somebody who has started in a new services firm, I actually tell them to price above where they think that clients are going to, land and ultimately what they're going to pay for, because you want to reinforce your brand, you want to reinforce your expertise, you want to reinforce your value. How do we all know about some services firms like IDEO, for example, right? We know them because not only is their service and their brand at an elevated level, but clients pay the freight that IDEO wants, right, for them to provide their expertise to clients. I think you have to go to market at a very high price point if indeed, because we're also talking about this balance between profit and cash flow, right? If you're trying to go to market and you're trying to be sort of a loss leader with a low cost service provider, now your profit's going to be less. You still have the same cash flow problems. I could go this one for a while, but I'll stop there.
You discussed the difference between billable and non-billable work. How should leaders think about investing time that doesn't immediately generate revenue?
Yeah, this goes to the question that was asked a little bit ago too, that there is a balance here for most services firms that if there's too much non-billable work, quote unquote, going on inside of the firm, that's going to have the firm be financially upside down at some point. But there are strategic investments you need to make in the skill of the team, in the capabilities of the firm, and maybe even the firm's ability to execute and deliver that are going to be non-billable, that just have to be an investment in the future of the firm. And too many services firms don't invest in the future of the firm and improving scalability, improving efficiencies, improving operation, etc. And then they wonder why they can't scale the business, or they wonder why clients aren't choosing them because competitors actually can support bigger clients and more business and multifaceted client engagements. So there's a balance to be struck there. But if you're not investing in the firm, you shouldn't be surprised that the firm doesn't sort of change its look over the course of a couple of years because you haven't made an investment for the firm to evolve and get better over time.
Documentation and process can feel boring to creative teams. How do you convince people that systems actually create freedom and scalability?
Yeah, if you don't have systems and if you don't have some scalability inside of a services firm, then the all the manual work that's going on will be the anchor to the business. And inside of work where people highly value their craft, they're going to often push back against policy, procedures, systems, etc., that in their mind convert their craft into more of a production environment where the craft loses some of the essence. But if you're going to have a services firm that actually has any growth to it and any scalability, it can't be we still have 8 people who are basically doing 8 different things that aren't coordinated and collaborative together in a way that you could actually bring some scale to it and serve more clients. So every services firm needs to think about scale unless the firm wants to just remain a boutique, small, 5 or 8 person firm. That's a very conscious choice to make. If you want to grow and you want to scale, you've got to put in the systems, procedures, and policies to support that.
In chapter four, client relations, one chapter says the client is not always right. Why is such an important lesson for service firms to learn?
It's hard for services firms because services firms tend to look at and landing clients is hard, right? Net new business is hard for any business, let alone services firms. So services firms often get very defensive and they look at their clients as these gold nuggets and not in some ways the tarnished stones that they are, because some clients are ultimately too difficult to work with, not very communicative, not very responsive, and you end up taking on the burden of all of the clients' flaws and all of their inabilities to be a good partner. And when you start to do that as a services firm, now you're eroding your value. You're also eroding your financial performance because you're investing more in that client than you're ever going to be able to charge that client for. And so I think services firms and the people who run services firms are tend to be people who are very client centric and oriented. I think that is good at its core. It can become a negative when you have a client that takes advantage of it.
Yeah, we've all experienced that if we've been in that business. You emphasize a client's diversity. How dangerous is it when one or two clients dominate a company's revenue?
It's very dangerous because if you're in this on paper, your profitability, but in cash flow, you've got receivables, right, that are as long as your arm. And if the majority of those receivables are trapped with one client and that client should default, go bankrupt, just that relationship goes sideways and now they decide they're not going to pay you, right? I've seen many services firms actually go out of business because they were too dependent on too few clients that were the economic engine of the business. You need diversity of clients purely from economic diversity inside of the firm, but you also need diversity of clients because otherwise you end up starting to operate like a an arm of that singular or a couple of clients where which relationship wise it can feel really good, but ultimately it can be something that hamstrings your ability to scale and grow because now when you try to go after new business, it's just you're an extension of these one or two or three clients that doesn't then make you that appealing to other clients who maybe want to do different things in a different way from different industries than those clients that you've gotten super embedded with. Embedded is the word I was looking for before. If you're too embedded, that can actually be that can be friction to growth and scale.
Yeah, and that also falls under what people try to push off as a trusted partner. And a lot of firms want that relationship with a couple clients. But I saw a firm in the IT world, a bunch of these firms where they had Oracle or Microsoft as big clients, and when those guys decided to pull the plug, then all of a sudden they had 89, 100 people now unemployed because they didn't have wide variety of clients that they were serving. The chapter on the promise of future work really stands out. Why do so many firms fall into the trap of accepting bad deals today for possible opportunities tomorrow?
Yeah, it's optimism and hope beyond the reality of the situation because prospective clients will say, "Oh, if you do this prototype for us, if you do this design work for us, then the production work that follows it, right, will be, $1 million and it's going to be totally worth it." And I almost never see that pan out where a carrot being held in front of a services firm ultimately turns into whatever the downstream value was that the client was representing. And so, as we've experienced that, and I've experienced it, and I've seen with others, I just see that rarely pan out. And if your expertise should really be valued, then don't devalue your expertise by saying, "Oh yeah, we'll do 100 hours worth of work for free in the hope that you give us 1,000 hours of work down the road." I almost never see those two things actually come together and for that to play out the way it's initially positioned. And I see services firms eat a lot of free work and stuff that doesn't convert into real business. And it just makes me sad.
Yeah, the big companies do that to you quite often. I ended up firing EMI as a client of a company I was brought in to be CEO of because for that reason, oh my God, you're working with, and I don't want to name the famous artists, but these very super famous artists. Hey, if we're not getting paid, what's the point? We can't even afford to buy their music.
Right. And this is probably counterintuitive. The company, the clients or prospective clients who will ask for the most free stuff in with the promise of bigger, better future work are almost always the biggest, well-heeled, most successful companies that as a logo you would want as a services firm, but they're the ones that almost always ask for free work for the promise of future, big work.
Yeah, I remember having a couple of those, and I said, I can bring you my mortgage. You can just pay them directly, and you don't have to pay me. But somebody's got to pay these people.
Right. Yes, I don't work for free. This is not a nonprofit that we're running over here.
Yeah, there's no foundation money behind us. You also discussed the importance of being willing to walk away from clients. How do leaders know when a client relationship is doing more harm than good?
This is a very stark example, but we fired a client that was being very disrespectful to our team. That our team would actually come back from the meetings and with not the same energy and almost in a state of despair. And at one point, I saw this happen meeting after meeting after meeting, and then ultimately I went to the team and I said, "Hey, why do you guys always come back from the meetings with this person at this client, and you're always in a state of despair?" And they told me what was happening inside of the meetings and the kind of disdain and the kind of disrespect that was happening. And so I went to the client and I said, "Is this really how like we're doing business and this is how you're acting?" And this person said, "Well, I wouldn't put it that harshly." And I said, "Okay, this is this. I will get you our written notice of termination, but I can tell you verbally now that we're done because I said you're not going to treat and you're not going to interact with our team that way." She was treating our team in a way that elevated her and then diminished them. And what I found out later is that her team at this company felt the same way, and they were able to voice their concern after we separated from that client. And so you as a services firm, like we want to put up with a lot because we feel like we are there to be advisors and guides to clients and we develop some empathy for their situation and the dynamics, etc. But when that crosses a line into it's now a destructive rather than constructive relationship, I think services firms have to be willing, able, and ready to terminate, even if that is going to cause some short-term financial harm. It's not worth it.
BP Oil just fired their CEO for being a bully. I don't know if you saw that this week.
I
But
didn't,
I mean,
but
how bad you can think really how horrible his behavior was for them to fire him, and he hadn't even been there a year yet. I mean, the revolt internally must have been so horrible. and keep people wanting to leave that they had to get rid of this guy.
Well, and I think that because of the nature of services firms to their clients, I think some clients actually treat their services firms in a very subservient role. And that doesn't fly for me because I'm like, we're either going to do this as equals and partners or let's not do it. But I see too many services firms still acquiesce to being in that subservient role.
Um, in part five, to grow or not grow, growth is often celebrated automatically, but you challenge that assumption. How should founders decide whether growth is actually the right strategy?
Yeah, it depends because growth brings complication. Growth is not without pain and suffering and all those analogies that we could talk about and come up with. So it should be a very conscious, intentional choice, especially to grow a services firm. Services firms are very easy to start. They're very hard to grow, and they're very hard to grow for some very fundamental reasons that if you don't understand those reasons, and if you don't intentionally say, okay, we're going to overcome these things to grow, then you're not comfortable with that journey and what that means, then you probably should stay relatively small and not try to grow because if you're not up for the challenge and what those difficulties are going to be, then you probably should make a more conscious decision to say small. I see too many services firms that try to grow, they then stub their toe, and then when I talk to them about it, they say, "Well, we didn't know about this, and we didn't know this was going to happen, and this was unexpected." And I'm almost always like, well, those things should have been expected. You should have been able to anticipate those things. This is not like, a complete reimagining of how, the business works. So I think there's just a sentiment that to get bigger clients, to get bigger business, we have to grow, we have to get bigger, but you have to understand the challenges and the limitations around those fundamentals that have to evolve for a services firm to get bigger.
You discuss shiny object syndrome. Why are entrepreneurs especially vulnerable to distractions?
Because we're distraction oriented for many entrepreneurs. We like new things. We like new challenges. We like to learn about new things in many cases. We're also explorers by nature. So we sometimes we also often think and feel that doing something different might be more interesting, more enticing, more exhilarating than the thing that we're currently doing. And so and I see this a lot with services firms where services firms will be like, hey, let's develop a product, a software product around our expertise. Well, starting and operating a software product company is very different than operating a services firm, and they're very unaware with it. And when I ask them why, they're like, well, we think running the product company and the software company would be easier, would be more interesting. We can then be software entrepreneurs, etc. And so I just think entrepreneurs in general are predisposed to be shiny object people because that's how we are fundamentally entrepreneurs at the beginning and at our core.
Many service firms dream about becoming product companies. And I think we want to be product companies because we want to be making money while we're sleeping. We don't want to have to always put our time in. I've tried that many times in my own consulting practice. Why is that transition much harder than people expect?
Yeah, I started to allude to it a second ago. In a services firm, you can start it and you can make almost no investment in getting the company up and running. And now you're
Yep.
out looking for clients. For a software product company, you make the investment in the product and in the company before anybody buys it and is giving you any revenue for it. So from the beginning, they're very different creatures. if you then think about, well, what are the mechanisms to then run, support, and fund a software product company from a services firm? Those are all very different. And so it's this allure that if we could create a software product and we could create recurring revenue for the firm, maybe we get out of the land of trading time for money because now we're trading time for code inside of a software product. I also see too many services firms that then force a square peg into a round hole around a software product where they think, oh, we're going to take what we do with our services, we're going to put a software wrap around it, and then we're going to try to take that to market. Well, people want the services as they're given, right? Because they're services. They don't want it wrapped up in a self-service, oh, I can now do it myself. No, part of the reason I was hiring you for your services is because I wanted to pay you to do that, not for
Yeah,
me,
right.
for my team to do it in a software product.
Yeah. Geographic expansion sounds exciting, but it can also create operational chaos. What warning signs should firms use before expanding?
Yeah, it's great to have on your website in other places that you have 12 offices and you're doing business in 12 markets, and you've geographically expanded from, one or two to get to that 10 or 12. And that's mostly about ego because the reality now is you can do business remotely from anywhere. And if a client insists that you be in their local market to do business with you as a services firm, right, that's probably not a good fit. That's probably not a good client for you, I would argue. So that's almost always ego driven. And whenever we do anything that's ego driven, it ultimately doesn't serve us well and best. You also underestimate the cost and the time and energy that it's going to take to get a new location up and running, from everything from, the physical stuff around it to then grabbing the market share. Because if you've been in a market for, let's call it 10 years, and now you decide to expand to other markets, you now have to condense that 10 years of market development in your current market, and you have to amortize that and say, how long is it going to take us in these other markets to get to where we are in our current market that we've been in for 10 years? And if you calculated that out, I don't think you would like that number, and I don't think you would make that investment because it's not going to happen in a year, even if you could cram all of that financial capability into a year. It's just, and so most companies underestimate the return that they're going to get and the speed of that return by opening new offices and new markets.
Yeah, I ended up having to close a company's New York office for exactly that reason. You can say that the team is the product in a services business, but does that fundamentally change the way leaders should think about hiring?
Yes and no, because in a services business, the team is the product. Um, and I think that you need to be much more thoughtful about then who makes up the team and what the team dynamics are, how you lead the team. Because if you're leading a team of experts in a services firm, those people are all crafts people in their own domains. So they're going to want some level of mastery, some level of autonomy, some ability to dictate their work and how they go about it inside of the processes and systems that you establish, like we talked about before. So I do think the leadership needs to change because your team ultimately is going to need to be led differently than if you're a big bank or a big software product company, et cetera, where people are going to be a little bit more chess pieces on a board, right, that you're moving around. In a services firm, your team is everything. The only reason you generate revenue is because of the team. The only reason you have satisfied clients is because of the team. And so I think making sure that your ego is a leader of a services firm doesn't trump the ego of your team and the capability of your team, I think is paramount.
Well, I mean, it's just like lawyers and accountants. You can have a non-solicitation, but the client's going to want whoever's handling them, no matter what the name of the firm is. They just go with the accountant or lawyer or whomever, right?
Yeah, and inside our business at Transform Labs, clients get very attached to their production team with us because they're in the trenches together, right? They're solving problems together. So as I would almost argue, being a leader of a services firm, you not only need to jump in the back seat, but maybe you need to be in the back, recesses of the vehicle and let the team do their best work, get the accolades, develop those relationships with the clients, because ultimately, you as the leader, you don't really matter that much in that equation of service delivery and value to clients. And so a lot of services firm leaders need to check their ego at the door.
One of the biggest mistakes firms make when recruiting talent.
They they think, well, they prioritize skill over compatibility into the team. And in a services firm where things can get intense, the compatibility, I think, matters as much as the skill. You also see a lot of services firms that will try to bring in a lot of junior talent because it's highly profitable. And then they'll, with the theory of, well, we'll coach them up. And over time, they're going to then add significant value to clients. Clients have now figured this out, and clients will actually say, who is going to be working on my engagement with you if indeed we were to engage? And what they don't want to hear is we're going to have two senior people at the top, and then we're going to have 15 junior people below them because they're not going to get expert quality work out of a team of two senior people and 15 junior people. And so I get the desire for services firms to want to have all of those junior people because they're highly profitable, but you're eroding your brand, you're eroding your client value and experience. And so I just don't think it's worth the risk. I think you need to lean more heavily on we've got high expertise, experience, and depth, and then sprinkle in junior, not gravitate so far to the junior side because it's good for the financial stake of the services firm. Because in the end, I think that's one of those things where you bite your nose to spite your face. In the short term, it feels good. You're going to get a nice monthly, quarterly bump on the financials. And then when clients start exiting or you can't sign new clients, then you regret structuring the team that way.
You dedicate a chapter to prima donnas. How damaging can high-performing but toxic employees be to a company's culture?
Especially in a services firm, very damaging. That's why looking for compatibility matters a lot. Because if you have a prima donna, a diva, whatever the label is you want to give to it, of somebody inside of the firm, it will create a toxic environment that will then have non-divas leaving and non-prima donnas leaving that ultimately were the core and were the skeleton of the firm. And so inside of a services firm, you can't have divas and prima donnas. It will tear the firm apart.
Team ownership and accountability are reoccurring themes in the book. How do you create a culture where people truly feel invested in the firm's success?
Yeah, that is probably the biggest leadership challenge inside of a services firm because people can ply their craft internal to companies or at other services firms or go out and put out their own shingle and do their own thing. I think that you've got to create an environment where people feel like their expertise is valued, their work is valued, that they're compensated fairly for it. Um, and you've got to structure things in a way that aren't super dictatorial. And it goes back to the leaders of firms being leaders but not being leaders in a way that it makes very capable, skilled people feel like they are now in a subservient position to the leaders of the firm. The best law firms that you see grow and expand, yes, everybody knows who the founding partners are and the leaders are, but what they also realize and what they also know inside of that firm is that if you show up and you do good work and you ply your craft effectively for clients, you are going to get recognized. You're going to be able to spread your wings. You've got to have that environment of growth and expansion inside of services firms. Otherwise, growth is not going to come and scale is not going to come.
You distinguish between ownership and leadership. Why do many founders struggle to separate the two?
Yeah, leadership and ownership are very different, just like leadership and management are very different. Leadership is some of the dynamics that I just talked about, creating the right environment, having an environment that's conducive to people's growth, success, empowerment, etc. But being an owner means you also have to operate in the best interest of the firm and the best interest of the business. And sometimes those things can collide, where doing what's in the best interest of the business is going to challenge your ability to lead the team in a positive way. And that's where most people struggle with how do I convert what I have to make a call as a business owner? How do I now communicate that? And how do I have this become something that people understand and there's transparency around so they still respect me as a leader, even when I'm making a business decision that maybe they don't like?
What's the biggest impact AI is having in service businesses today?
Ooh, I mean, it's many. It's a lot.
Or what should be your biggest concern? I mean, like I know McKinsey and BCG. I just saw the managing partner of BCG the other day for Asia for Vietnam. And so before you had lots of junior people and the big bills that they would give them. But now, because of AI, they can get a bunch of virtual assistants in the Philippines to do it just as well. And now they are charging people some fee, but mostly they make all their money on the success of whatever they recommend. So how is AI, how can service firms compete with AI and get paid a reasonable amount of money?
Yeah, the way that I look at AI, and I run around the country now speaking to different groups and events about AI. And this is true for whether you're a services firm, a product company, what have you. The legacy way of operating and structuring a company over the last 20 or 30 years has been people, process, and software. The more people you have, the more process you need. The more people and process you have, the more software you need as the containerization of those processes and the tasks that people are performing. AI is deconstructing that legacy operating model and structure, and it's saying, I can do the tasks that people were doing. If you give me the process context, I can operate on top of that process context, and I can replace a lot of the software that you've been doing to containerize these processes and these tasks. So AI is now sort of and it's constructing a new operating structure, which is put AI in the center of it, have that be your intelligent core, and then you just get all of these outputs and these outcomes that then drive different actions and different decisions. So I would say for every company, regardless of whether it's a services firm or it's a product company, you have to rethink the way that you operate. And I think for most companies who are going to be successful over the next 5, 10, 15 years, they're going to have an AI operating system at the center of the business that then produces a lot of what happens inside of the business. And then people's value, judgment, relationships are going to be at the edge of that are then going to provide the value to customers, either as a product company or to clients as a services firm.
I can't believe, Ryan, an hour has gone by. It was too fast, and I enjoyed listening to you speak. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Congrats on this book and the other books you've written. Hopefully, we'll have you back again when you write the next one.
Mark, thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of your weekend.